Welcome to the BOSCO expert panel session around last click doesn't win and rethinking attribution modeling. I'm John Redman. I'm the founder of Modo25, which is a digital marketing performance in-housing business and software company that have developed BOSCO. BOSCO is a digital marketing intelligence platform. So we're hosting the session today. We're very pleased to have Alex Kelly and Cormac and Tom Pickard from the Modo25 team. Cormac, who's previously at TM Lewin, Paddy Power, and Alex at Belstaff, Rees and M&S. So we've got some wisdom joining us in a minute. Before we ask the panel to join us, I'm just going to run through a bit of background on why are we authorised to talk about this subject. We are live on Facebook. We will also share a copy of the recording afterwards. If you have any questions for the panel or any points that you either agree with or disagree with, we'd like to make it a really sort of interactive event. So please get involved, use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we can either address it direct to the whole audience or just to the panel, and we'll take it on head on. So it's quite a lively topic at the moment, especially with things like iOS 14, changes around the cookie laws and data. So we're going to try and cover all of that off today. Anything we don't get covered off in the questions, if you do ask them, we will follow up in an email to everybody who attended and everybody who registered. So first of all, thanks for joining us this afternoon, and we will finish on time. We want to respect your time and we don't want to overrun. So BOSCO is a digital marketing intelligence platform, and we as a business also have a sort of hybrid agency that helps people in-house, and then we have our intelligence platform. But there's a slightly bigger and more important, if anything's more important than attribution, this certainly is, bigger story behind Modo25. I set the business up with a friend of mine who was the founder of Skyscanner, and we were on a charity bike ride from the UK to Australia. We're currently just sort of east of Ankara in Turkey at the moment, and we wanted to change the agency model, and we also wanted to build some software to help people make better decisions about where they spend their money online. But we didn't know what to call the business. We didn't know what to call software, and we didn't know what to call the agency. And we were coming up with all those sort of typical agency names. So we were going to call it probable or predictable. But actually, we decided to name the business Modo after a 9-year-old girl at the orphanage in Uganda. And she represents 280 other children at the orphanage, which we help and support. And we actually named our software BOSCO, as you can see on my t-shirt, fully merched up today, after the person who runs the orphanage. So there's sort of a slightly different purpose to our business, and we exist to encourage the potential of other people, and particularly those less well off than us. So, and BOSCO will enable you to have all your data accurately in one place, and enable you to make better marketing and planning and budgeting decisions. So we're not going to go through the platform today. If you did want to learn how you could index yourself against your peers, where to allocate your budget, or where to predict future performance, everybody on the call today, we can arrange for you to have a free trial of BOSCO, where we could actually connect your data up to our system, connect all your channels together, and then forecast which channel you should be investing your budgets in based on your actual market, based on the demand in your market, and we could then predict where future profits lie. So that's what we do as a business, and we also have a team of practitioners who help people in-house their digital marketing. And one of those teams is Tom. So Tom Pickard is on the panel, and he's going to be talking about how we sort of apply attribution to some of the clients we work with. So, but less about BOSCO, less about Modo25. Let's get into the sort of meat and potatoes of what we're here to talk about today, which is attribution. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to invite the panel to turn their cameras on. So welcome, gentlemen. So Cormac, do you want to go first? Introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, why you authorised to talk about this.
Yeah, thanks, John. So my background is in digital marketing, e-commerce, customer analytics. I've worked across a few industries, hospitality, gambling, but most recently and mostly in retail as well. So it's a subject I'm passionate about, weirdly, but it's a very important topic for any business, you know.
And Alex?
Hi there. Well, thank God Cormac, because I'm not sure I'm an expert, but I can ask all the stupid questions. My role is I'm a multi-channel marketer, so I sit across channels, and I suppose my job is to pick between those channels and try and figure out where the real value is. So I've worked for retailers like M&S, Bellstar, Frisch, Jigsaw, so on the sort of fashion apparel side, and Neon on the beauty side. And then consulted for a range of different brands on their multi-channel strategies. I'm a sort of unapologetic generalist, I suppose. And
you're going to pick holes in our digital-only strategy and say, well, what about everything else?
Yeah, I'm not a naysayer. Like I'm on board. I'm fully on board. But yeah, it's my job to look at all of the channels and all the strategies and sort of take a more agnostic view on it, really. So, which means that for my teams, I'm asking 1,000 questions and picking into it, and just being the guy who asks why, and which I think is really important. So yeah, that's me. I do that. I'm currently consulting for a range of brands, anything from fintech through to fashion, sort of lifestyle, and FMCG as well. So yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Alex. And Tom?
Hello. So I'm performance marketing manager here at Modo25. Qualified to talk about this because a lot of the clients that I've worked with in the last 7 years have sort of gone through this transition to new attribution models, or even just getting their data correct in the first place. And obviously it's super important to all your digital, but also actually probably offline, as we'll get on to, is making sure that your data and the way you attribute that data is correct.
Okay, good. So you can give us some practical hands-on advice, Tom. And I think that's the one thing we really want to give you out of this session is there's a lot of people talk about attribution, but actually hopefully you'll leave with a few nuggets of things maybe you could do differently tomorrow in the office, or at least some ideas of where you can start and maybe what are some of the pitfalls you can avoid or areas you should go look. One thing we want to do before we get going though is just share a quick poll just to see where everybody is. So we've got 2 questions in the poll. One is, are you already using an attribution model? And just so your last click is an attribution model, okay? It's just maybe not the best one, but it is a model. And then also is, what is currently your biggest challenge to putting an attribution model in place? So we're going to launch that poll. If you could quickly just respond, then we'll share the results of that. So you should see the poll in the screen. I'm not sure if we can let the panelists vote, so we can.
No, we're not allowed.
Sorry, not allowed to vote. Yeah, I don't want you skewing the results. So we'll give everybody a couple of seconds. We've got half the people have voted, so we'll just get a few more to vote, and then we'll share the results. So it looks like a lot of people have got one, but they're not sure it's the right one. And so let's just end the poll and share the results. And again, we can share this in the newsletter afterwards. And I think the biggest challenge people are saying is agreeing on the model. And I think that is, I actually thought it might be not having all the data in one place, because that is often one of the hardest things. So I suppose why don't we kick off with that? If you don't have a multi-channel attribution or a multi-touch model in place, so you are just with a one touch attribution model in place, I suppose where should you start? And if we go first of all to Cormac, where would you start with that? If you were currently just doing last click wins and you want to do this, where would you start?
I'm going to give a kind of a boring answer, but you got to start with your data. You got to start with, are you tracking your data effectively? If you're not having these conversations so far, I would probably take a guess at your data mightn't be in a great place just purely because data needs to be maintained, it needs to be set up, it needs to be understood. So what will inform an attribution model is your click data, impression data, and you need to understand where you're tracking that, how you're tracking it, and to what level it's being tracked at. So are different channels being tracked effectively? Is there any gaps in the tracking? Is there incomplete data sets? How are you bringing that data against your own data? So I guess the first starting point is kind of almost like a review or an audit and just understanding your data and to what point it's being broken down across all your marketing channels.
Okay, and I suppose Alex, as a broader marketing professional, what would you see as where would you want to start, or what questions would you be asking?
Yeah, no, I'll agree first up, because I think most of the problems I've seen is when the data just doesn't make any sense and people don't challenge it. So there's a bit around just good housekeeping. So, how are you tracking, how are you monitoring it, and then looking at that data, because stuff falls off sometimes, and you think you're looking at whatever that version of the truth is, whether it's last click, first click, any of the other versions. So you've just got to have confidence in what you're looking at first, and I think from that point you can sort of move forwards. And I think last click is a model, like it's a pure model, if you like. We'll talk about the reasons why it has huge pitfalls, but at least it's a pure model in that sense. But then I think you've got to look at your type of business, what your business goals are. Think about the buying cycle. How long is your buying cycle? Like, there are loads of different things that can impact which type of attribution model you might want to look at for your business. And the reason why I think, in the poll, people are like, the problem is agreeing. That was, I think, the top answer. I think because there isn't a perfect answer. Attribution isn't perfect. There isn't a perfect answer. So that therefore leaves it wide open to interpretation. Even though it's data-based, it's sort of, are you reading the data front to back, left to right? So it's all in the interpretation, really. And I suppose just accepting. I think you just have to accept that it isn't perfect yet. We'll talk about.
I think often when we talk about attribution with clients, everybody's sort of going for this sort of perfect model, and there isn't a perfect model. I suppose when we've talked about it before, it's about, well, they're all wrong. There's one that's slightly less wrong, and that's the best fit. Because again, it depends on how many products you've got or who your perfect client is. So we've had a few questions in, and I suppose when you talk about data. When Cormac was talking about the data, I suppose, what data do we mean? And then we could tie that into someone who's talking about Facebook, and we're not going to recommend models for you just off a question, because I think that would be professionally irresponsible.
John, I saw that question come through, and it's a really good question, right? And like, the data is such a broad term. Like, when I'm talking about that, I suppose I specifically mean, if GA is what you're using to track your marketing activity and build an attribution model off, it's that data. It's your UTM parameters. It's your linking of your campaign data from your AdWords through to GA, if that's your single point of truth. And then it's also looking at your conversion events. Are they matching what you see in your internal systems? So I think you always need to have a kind of a fallback in a second kind of benchmark data point. And ultimately, everything comes back to the pound notes you're getting into your bank at the end of the day. So the first place you start is making sure your kind of conversion events are matching to your system, whether it be your web hosting platform or your financial systems. And then within that, it's tracking and understanding all of the click level data that's happening within the different platforms. And then within each of the marketing platforms, it's understanding how your campaigns and your different elements of performance are being tracked. So then you get into the point where you add that to your own commercial data. But I think the first thing is just getting your GA, if it is GA, set up correctly.
And it doesn't always line up, right? It's sort of like, with all of these systems, there's a bit like, well, hang on, there's a difference here. What's happened there? What's fallen off a cliff? And that's the element of imperfection that you just have to accept. I
think you're right. Getting everything in one place is really hard. And I suppose practically, Tom, if you were to put this into place, I suppose, what's the minimum amount of data do we need to make something useful?
So I would say, I mean, maybe going back to your first question to begin with, as getting your data in the right place, but also what you're trying to achieve is a question I'd ask very early on in this process, because there's no point sort of going, okay, we need an attribution model when you don't know why you need an attribution model. So you should probably be asking the question internally, okay, well, what's the business trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve by implementing a business model? Attribution model, and then from there you can then go on to implement the things you need to get the correct data. So as you were just talking about, sort of one source of the truth, and then as much as physically possible to fit into that. So there's going to be channels that you're never going to get into Google Analytics. Your offline is going to be almost impossible to 100% link into your data. So you've just got to, I guess, at a minimum, I would suggest getting all your digital into whatever your one source of truth is, because the more data you've got, the better your attribution model is going to be.
Because you're absolutely right. You can look at Google and they've got some like amazing tools in there, but it's really good at looking at those channels. So they're very platform centric. So they come up really.
And I think that's one thing we've got as a particular team here of data scientists, and they always look at the 6 different models that Google offer within their attribution, but then they also produce bespoke models to help people based on their actual business and their products and everything that they've got. And I suppose with that sort of on and offline, how could you make that work, or is it a case where we just got to focus on the digital, or is it a case we can start tying it up? And I suppose how would you go about even looking at that? I suppose, Matt, we'll go to you first. Linking up that.
Yeah, I think like Tom touched on there, like, and Alex said, it's a very difficult thing to do, is to kind of effectively measure your offline activity. For me, I'd always start with your categorization of your channels and how you kind of understand them. I tend to break the channels into kind of 4 buckets of your branded channels, your paid channels, CRM, and then a bucket of other, which is the things you just can't track, but they're important to be kept as a separate channel. When you think about what offline activity will be doing, it tends to drive branded traffic, people searching for your brand because an intent has been generated by some offline activity. So you should be able to see a sort of spike if you've done enough activity, or if you've done something that's pretty aggressive offline, like, TV or something that's kind of a out of home stuff. Those are the channels that you'll tend to see, and sometimes measuring against a benchmark or kind of a run rate to give you a sort of a idea there. There's more traditional methods then, like putting an offer code in advertising, and then you kind of see how many people have redeemed that. But that again is flawed as well, because there's a lot of people who see advertising and don't redeem through the code. Even through digital channels like affiliates, that's the case as well. So It's very difficult. But that might kind of the main one I've used in the past is understanding your branded channels, and then looking at sort of variances, accepting that it's imperfect, but trying to see if you can pull out trends and see what the sort of change there looks like over those periods.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's as a sort of brand, I started out as a brand campaign manager on the brand side, and before a lot of these channels existed. I know I don't look old enough, but just good light and good moisturizer. But and they weren't commercial channels, a lot of these, so they weren't in consideration, and the tools are pretty blunt, and they still are pretty blunt. Those softer measures, and I think you have to look exactly as Colin say, your branded elements of your campaign, because let's face it, if you try and measure them on the same, whether it's a CPA model or whatever, they don't compare, because they're doing a different job. But you have to accept that they do feed into the funnel, and that if you turn them off, which is the bluntest tool of measuring if something has an impact, then you're going to see further down the funnel problems with, and you can look at that. You can turn channels on and off. You can do incrementality testing. But if you look on your branded channels for direct brand search terms, direct traffic, your social media following and noise, all these other things will paint a picture towards it. It won't give you an exact science, but
it can hopefully give you some signposts of where then to go investigate, or to look, or to give some credit. And I suppose one thing where we normally start talking to people about this is and it amazes me still, some massive retailers spending hundreds of thousands of pounds a month are still optimizing to last click wins. And so if you are optimizing to last click wins, don't beat yourself up, right? Because that is relatively normal. Doing this is hard. But I suppose from your experience, Tom, why is last click wins not necessarily the best model?
So we get people in quite often who are like, we want to acquire new customers. Which digital channels can we use to acquire new customers? And those kind of questions. We want to grow the brand. Growth is important, but then on last click wins, you're purely aiming for the final channel that will convert, and that's not always going to be the channel that introduced people to your brand in the first place. And you're never going to grow as quickly if you don't get some sort of reward towards the channels that are driving new customers in the first place. So maybe after they did see your video on YouTube, maybe they didn't buy anything for a few weeks and then they went through on an affiliate link. But if you're doing last click wins, then that YouTube campaign is never going to get any of that share of the revenue, and you're never going to invest more into it because it just, on a last click wins model, it looks useless.
Somebody described it to me as, it's the hangover analogy, which I'm sure everyone's heard, but it's good enough to say again. It's like going out, drinking 10 pints, and then having a tequila at the end of the night and blaming your hangover on the tequila.
It's always the kebab that makes you feel.
Yeah. And that, I don't know if you have heard that, but somebody said it to me and I was like, you're right, that's me. I mean, no, sorry, it's not me. But it is exactly that. You're like looking at the last thing you did and attributing all the impact. And if it is tequila, it probably was the last thing, but for me. But in a brand, there are so many touch points. I think it's so simplistic, and it doesn't take into account how complex the sales funnel is now. And everyone was, consultants pushing out funnel diagrams, and even the funnel is outdated. It's just it's so fluid, and it's so sort of.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's also, if you are trying to grow your brand or acquire new customers, what digital marketing has done over maybe the last 10 years, we've all been fighting for the bottom of the funnel. Like, it's relatively easy to pay £1, make £10, and just turn that dial up. But actually, what we've stopped looking at is the broader sort of more creative marketing piece of building your brand and actually creating awareness earlier up that sort of research phase. And because people have stopped doing that, they've maybe not even been considering tracking that, which I think is probably why we're even having the conversation today. So another question that's just come in is there sort of a number of actual channels you need in order to be able to have an effective attribution model? Is there a minimum number of channels we need to be marketing?
Well, I'm happy to talk to this because as I mentioned earlier, I kind of build those buckets out. And I think there's some areas where you need to be really careful with the channels you have, and they vary by industry. So for instance, I've worked in hospitality, and actually like Yext and Google Maps and that sort of traffic that's being generated through the mobile phones looking for stores and looking for locations is actually much bigger than traditional retail probably, and some pure online players. So it has to be somewhat specific to your business and understanding where your traffic sources are coming from. But there's certain kind of areas where people trip up, I think. And John, you mentioned there about kind of last click. It scares you sometimes that last click is used as a channel for businesses. It scares when people have things like search not broken out into generic or brand. Yeah. So they're not looking at the different type. And those are completely different types of ratios of customers, different types of behaviors, different cost per acquisition. And when you aggregate those sort of channels, that can be tempting to do, especially for some agencies who might be incentivized in the right way, not you guys, obviously. But they might want to aggregate that data because it makes their CPAs and their costs look better, but it's completely different customers. One is people who know your brand coming to you. One is someone who's in the market for a shirt and doesn't care where they're going, is going to find it on Google. So areas like search have to be broken out. Things for me like paid social should always be broken out, because paid social, usually you've got two functions. You've got acquisition, which is excluding existing customers, and you've got retargeting, which is targeting existing customers or targeting traffic. And again, two very different behaviors. You probably already paid for these guys, and over here you're fighting for every inch in a very competitive space. So I would say you want to be really careful about for the number of channels you have, you need to break it down to kind of a level below than you probably have it right now. And what you want to do on top of that is break down every element of that as granular as you can get it without kind of overcomplicating it, right? So that you can always work back up a pivot. You can't work back down, retrospectively. You can't break down data points retrospectively. You have to kind of get there from the start. So that would be kind of my advice.
And if you've got someone who's, particularly if it's being reported back up the scale internally, and all they're looking at is a ROAS or ROI, like if that is all you're basing your performance on, and you're hitting your agency on that model, then they will only ever push towards a conversion tactics and not allow the brand to grow over time. And that's the typical sort of short-sighted promotional, like up and down and up and down. You can only ever pay your way there as opposed to the longer term earn your way over there. With Lens, it is Lens, and you can look at how you split your budget between consideration, awareness consideration, and conversion. But you have to split those out. Otherwise, the agency's only ever going to push into the one way where they're being, sort of driven into, really.
And I would add to that as well with, it's just to sort of try and answer that question about, is there a minimum? I would say no, despite the fact we just said you need loads of data, but everything that you are tracking and measuring should be in the same place. So I think maybe these types of questions come up because you get platform individual attribution models. So you can get attribution within Google Ads, and that is attributed between just your Google Ads platform's campaigns. But then if you're doing a different attribution model in Facebook and you've got, 30-day views and you're doing something completely different, the data's sort of meaningless because you're just siloing different bits of data and tracking them differently. So I wouldn't say there's a minimum, but I would say everything that you can physically track, put it all in one place.
Yeah, okay. So this is starting to sound quite complicated, all right? So, and I love all this data stuff, but this is starting to sound quite complicated. And I suppose it's going to require quite a lot of effort, maybe some tech, maybe some clever people. How do you go about convincing senior people this is worth doing, getting their buy-in to actually go down this? What's going to be the benefit for the business? And I suppose, how do you go about getting their buy-in? So I suppose, should we start, Alex? I suppose you've probably got experience with this from a sort of pure marketing side. How would you go about convincing people this is a good idea?
I'd sort of first start with just telling them they've been lied to. And this is part of the problem. Like everyone looked at digital as the savior, which it is, and it's like the dominant channel, and particularly as everyone moves towards D2C models. That's absolutely right. But before, there were the numbers that were coming through, and they're being reported back up, and they were just numbers. No one knew, because the percentages were like these weird small numbers, but they added up to big revenue, and everyone just, you went to the finance director and said, like, look, this is working. Should we do more of it? Yes. So I think the problem is all the channels claimed all the sales, and so we've had quite a long time now of people not reporting in the right way or reporting accurately, or leadership understanding actually what attribution really means. And I think they start to get their heads around it when people looked at the value of stores, and they're like, oh, well, it's a problem with attribute, but they still didn't really understand the complexity of the sort of dark arts of digital marketing. So first of all, I think you have to explain to people that actually some of the things that we're looking at for aren't correct, and that it's a very simplistic view, and have the same debate that we're having now. And I think attribution is a journey, right? Lots of people might be at last click, and that is a way of measuring it. And then you can go on a journey. You can look at first interaction, take out direct traffic, which is a bit better than last click. You can look at it linearly and then sort of add in all the touch points and attribute, give equal sort of value to each of those. So there are various different steps you can become closer to a version of the truth. Never perfect, but closer to that version of the truth. And then you get to the point where you go, okay, well, my business is slightly more complex and the channels are more complex, so I might need to build something that is a custom build, and you might be able to do some of that yourself just by looking at the channels and saying, well, we're a bit more awareness focused, so we have a longer sales funnel, so we're going to put more value on that first touch, a little bit less on this, and you know, so you can sort of make some assumptions, which is good. Like it's a journey of getting better, and then you can go to the point, okay, well, we're going to
and in your experience, I suppose there's two things here. If you've been the guy saying, "This is give me more money, I'm going to get you more sales," and you've been the one advocating I suppose the addiction to the Google PPC and Google Shopping drug. If you've been advocating that for the past few years, and now you're saying, "Well, actually, we need to wean ourselves off this, and we need to sort of change our lifestyle and get a healthier mix." I suppose there's a credibility thing potentially there. So you might almost have to go back and say, well, "Actually, we've been getting it wrong."
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, on that point, right, I think sometimes it can be really effective to go after the finance director or your finance person, because ultimately they're usually the most cynical. They're usually the one that's signing off all the cash. And they're usually seeing this huge amount go out, and they get a report back every month that says, all my marketing channels combined drove 10 million, yet I've only got 7 million in the bank. You know, what's going on here, right? So there tends to be frustrations there because they hate to see money being spent. Sometimes. And I think, so going after them on two fronts. One is that ultimately they'll unlock the investments, you know, usually. And then second part is that there's usually a kind of a frustration that's bubbling there because of a lack of understanding. And if you can kind of get a senior stakeholder like that on your side, they tend to have a lot of voice and kind of be almost make them the person who's kind of involved with getting this and getting the win on their side. Because the most important thing with this is that attribution is a zero-sum game. You know, you're just moving around different conversions within the total, as opposed to attributing at a channel level, which is what Tom exactly pointed out earlier. So that'll probably be my advice: is go after the kind of, just put your hands up and say, we want to do this as honestly and as truthfully as possible. There's multiple ways we can do this, and these are the implications of moving towards this model versus this model versus this model, and this is how they reconcile back with our numbers we see at a financial level, and this is what we want to trial with it.
So almost going through an education, or almost like we're doing a discussion, and letting them almost find the answer themselves and go, well, actually, should we do it this way or should we do it that way? And
that's what an FD does, right? So they're highly numerate people, and they like constantly looking at business models and you know, whether it is business plans and how quickly those things are going to return. So, you know, you can play the numbers game with that person, and, you know, they're also really difficult to bullshit if they're any good, and most of them are. That's why they got to the job in the first place. So, and I've had the conversation with, you know, CEOs and an FD is like, I don't believe it. I think we're just spending money here. Can't we just turn it off and see what happens? And they're like, well, that is definitely one way of doing it, and we'll you know, that is a way of doing it, but there's a risk with it. You know, the next way to do it is, okay, well, let's do a proper incrementality test, and we'll take a region and we'll split it out and we'll do it in a safe way. You know, incrementality testing for the sake of like running something for 3 weeks and reviewing it is a great way of getting those people on board and saying, well, you know, because agencies can sometimes say, keep spending, and you're not really looking at the plateau and the effect on it, or not. And sometimes the answer is spend less, particularly, you know, maybe branded search. Like, there are times when you might need to not have to spend as much for traffic that's coming out for you.
Tom, I know you've had more than your fair share of awkward conversations with clients over time about spending all their money. I suppose, how do you deal with these conversations with senior stakeholders so that, because I suppose the challenge sometimes could be is people go, right, well, we've tried it for a few weeks, we just want to do something else now, go back to what was working before.
Yeah, I think there is an element of helping people understand and helping senior stakeholders understand. There's also an element of fear or trepidation towards changing something that works. You know, if you're getting big numbers through every month that say digital's doing well, and then somebody comes to you and says, right, we want to change how we track all of digital, and we'll have to do all this new tracking, and it all have to go into one area, and, you know, it's a big sweeping change. They're going to be like, but what we do works. So I think there has to be an element of demonstration as well, and it's something we've done with clients. And so you can never 100% say this is everything that's going to happen when we change attribution model, but there is an element of, okay, let's pick out 3 attribution models that might work for you. This is some of the changes we'd make on this attribution model. You know, we'll put more money into Facebook, for example. On this attribution model, we'd be putting more money into affiliates. And, you know, this is how we'd be moving your money around, and this is how we'd expect the revenue to change between channels. And it just helps alleviate that they're not blindly jumping into like all my data's disappearing kind of fear.
I think that's a great point. I think, like, obviously Tom is most practically applying this stuff. I think what happens sometimes, it becomes a theoretical sort of conversation as to, you know, the ideas of attribution, whereas you can actually root them very cleanly in the practical, you know. And sometimes what can happen is you kind of get tempted and you might walk away and go, okay, well, we're last click now, I want to move to a data-driven, you know, machine learning model. And I would kind of warn against that somewhat, is that if you want to bring people with you, sometimes actually moving from, I tend to go first click first. So I move from last click to first click, because it just completely shifts the, it's wrong, but it's less wrong, like you said earlier, John.
It's easy to understand as well, right? You
could conceptually, exactly, very simple conceptually to go, okay, well, now we were there, now we're here. And these are the decisions we're going to make because we've changed that. It's rewarding Facebook acquisition, which is 80% new customers, whereas before we had that budget being invested in affiliates, which was 80% existing customers. And you can kind of see practically what it is, because all you're trying to do is create a kind of something to help you make better decisions on where to invest and where to understand your values coming from. So that would be kind of my step. My kind of advice would be to move, if you are a last click and you want to change your attribution, change it kind of almost conceptually quite easily to a weighted model or something that's a bit more simple, and then move towards data driven when you kind of earn the right to take the kind of company that far, because you're getting towards marginal gains at that point. When you can start moving into those sort of areas, when you move from last click to first click, it's quite a severe, you know, clean break that changes it.
You said it better than I did, Cormac. Like, it's a journey. Like, I totally agree, and you've articulated it much clearer than I did. But like, you don't have to be perfect from the start. You can be better, and then better again, and then, but you know. So I think that's absolutely right.
And is there a risk of we could do some modelling and some scenario planning around, right, let's take all your data, let's look at all your conversions over, pick a good solid sort of trading period which is reasonably quiet, there isn't too many promotions, so we can get some good clean data. We could maybe say, right, let's run this model, this model, this model, right, here's how you should be splitting your budgets and spending your media to achieve the goal you want to achieve. Is there sort of a nervousness that it might initially be a little bit worse, or people's perception is that it's a little bit worse? And I suppose, how long should you give it? All right. So if you go and you get everybody on board and you take that sort of deep breath and go, right, we're going to change all the reporting, we're going to go with this new model. How long do you need to give it to actually sort of almost wash through and get everybody on board? What's a reasonable amount of time? I don't know who wants to take. Tom, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think it's going to be, it's one of those wishy-washy answers, but it's going to be different by brand, and you have to understand your own business and your own brand to get an idea of how long you need to understand an attribution model over. Because if you run some branding activity, you'll have an idea of how long that branding activity is going to stay in customers' minds and sort of continue to influence decisions. And that's probably about the length that you need to run an attribution model before you decide to change it again. So, you know, if you run a TV campaign in January, how long are you expecting people to still remember your brand for? Is it months, 6 months, a year? And that's going to feed into how long you should be running this model for.
It's different, Tom, isn't it? If you're a car and you're a lip gloss, it's a different consideration phase. So it's got to be different for different brands.
Yeah, and people are going to be influenced, exactly as you say, people are going to be influenced differently along the journey. A car, as you say, is going to be a months-long journey potentially for some people, and you're not going to get a view on your attribution model for maybe a full year on something like that.
And what are the sort of practical things we talked about before? Getting, so Cormac was all about, right, we've got to be tracking it properly, and we've got to get all the data into one place. So, but practically, if you're a digital marketing manager, you've got one agency doing Facebook, you've got another agency doing your Google AdWords, you're doing your shopping in-house. What are the sort of practical steps you need to go and look at to even make sure you've got all your tags and tracking in place?
I don't know, Tom's obviously in the weeds on this one. I've done a little bit of work recently on this where I think first you want to establish what the channels you want are. And I think what you have to do is you have to take kind of ownership over that true data source. So each of those channels will be tagging up. So if you have a AdWords, might be labeled how they're labeling campaigns differently to how Facebook are after different agencies and affiliates and stuff. I think what you want to do is I tend to go after default channel groupings in Google, because you can very quickly kind of use that as an area, and you can build them quite simply in the GA platform, based on a rule set. So you can kind of decide as to what you want. Now that's going to, in GA, give you a last click, but you can look at different attributions in GA as well before you start bringing that data out. So I would suggest kind of bucketing out what the channels you want are, and then kind of challenging your agency, if it is an agency, with breaking those down. So for instance, if you're looking at, say, paid search, and you're not breaking down shopping versus search versus brand, what are the sort of naming conventions you need to apply at a campaign level, to ensure you can build rules off the back of it? So if it's as simple as, PSE for paid search, PSE NB as a kind of naming convention at the starts of every UTM parameter, every campaign, then you can build a logic off the back of that. So maybe that's getting a little bit too kind of into the weeds in it, but Tom's probably better positioned than me on this, but that's how I've tended to do it in the past.
He's teed you up there. Cormac's either teed you up or stitched you up there, Tom. I suppose, what practical things, if you're sat looking at Google Analytics or you sat looking at AdWords, what practical things could people go away and start looking at to see even if they're ready to do this?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, just to sort of go back to the practicalities of getting this started, have one central owner for this. Don't go out to your agency, or if it's internal, your internal teams, and just say, we're doing a new attribution model, you guys sort it out between you, because it's never going to happen. Get sort of one figurehead of this and get them to group these people together. So get your agencies in one room, or get your teams in one room and discuss it between you, because everybody's going to fight their own corner. The display guys are going to fight for whatever works best for them, and your affiliate guys are going to fight for whatever works for them. And you'll be, if you're speaking to a third party like Criteo or something, they're gonna back their own model of measurement. So having one specific person should just take control and say, right, this is what we're doing, everybody do this, is I would say.
And I suppose that then loops back to the senior buyer and someone saying, right, I'm going to sponsor this. This is why we're doing it, and this is how we're going to do it from a senior point down. Because I know the brand can stay anonymous, but I remember a story you told me on a Black Friday campaign where there was a retailer that the retailer, one channel needed to up performance. They started bidding on their own brand, and then the organic guys started going crazy because they're like, you're stealing my conversions. And again, that's like the internal politics of who gets credit for what. Which I suppose is, you might even be messing with, by changing the attribution model, you might even be messing with people's bonuses or targets.
Yeah, 100%. People, if you cut your display budget down from 50k a month to 5k a month, somebody might lose their job over that. So you can see why people are, quick to defend their own channels. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's important to get it right, but in terms of the practicality and what you can do right now to have a look at your attribution, I would, first of all, go into whatever tracking platform you've got, and if it's Google Analytics or Adobe, have a look at some customer journey paths and just see what your most common customer journey paths are, because all of those analytics channels will do that, and just get an idea of what's starting a journey, what's in the middle of the journey, and what's at the end. And if you've got GA, you can start applying just some attribution models that are non-permanent, and you can just sort of see what your results look like on a non-permanent basis by adding in some attribution. So go and check your data is correct, and then just go and have a look at some customer journeys and think, okay, we're on last click right now. Am I rewarding actual customer journeys that are happening? Probably not.
Okay. No, good. We've just got a question, and I've just read it, and I'm trying to work out how best to answer that. It's, I suppose it's more, I think that, so the question is, he's coming to the panelists, this Brian on the call, he offers a referral program, but most of these traffic is coming through his brand campaigns, and he'd like to work out how we can go back further. I think that's probably more to do with the tracking solution you have in place. So depending on how big your budgets are, and again, if I get any of this wrong, Tom, guys, just chat. But I think as you get bigger, and you start spending more money on multiple channels, you probably need to start looking at more sophisticated tracking tools. So things like, unfortunately, some of the big search engines have gone and bought some of the best tools. So you have to then go spend more money with these people, which is a bit like, yeah, it's like the alcoholics buying the off license. But it's so there's Search Ads 360 or Campaign Manager, which then can track your impressions and views further up the funnel, then link that back to the conversion and put it all into one place. So I suppose it really depends on how much you're spending and how important it is to track that.
Is 360 sort of only makes sense when you're over 100 million revenue? It's sort of, there's a...
Well, I wouldn't say it's that much. We normally start talking to clients about Search Ads 360 at about 100 grand a month spend. Because also then you've got the question, which is a completely separate challenge, is when your website gets to a certain size, and again, this is another classic Google have got you, is you'll start getting sample data from GA. So then you've got to pay for the advanced version of GA, which again isn't an insignificant amount of money. So I think these are all sort of champagne problems to have, but they do need to be considered, because you can't run an effective attribution model with sample data, right? You need to have accurate data to be able to do that. I don't know if anybody wanted to add to that or agree or disagree with any of that.
Just to practically answer Brian's question, and I'm going to make some assumptions because I don't 100% know how you set up, but most people are on Google Analytics, and most people, you know, hopefully have got all their channels tracking to some extent in Google Analytics. And within that platform, you can see customer journeys under the conversions section down the left-hand panel. So you will be able to see all your customer journeys and how they started just within that section. So you should be able to see your initial referrers in there, presuming everything's tagged up correctly in the first place.
There you go. There's your answer. And that's better than my waffle about buying expensive tools. So thank you, Tom. But we've got another question. We've got a few more. I don't know if we're going to get through them all, because I'll just do a quick wrap up in a minute. But someone's asked around Facebook and around attribution windows. So if with the Facebook moving to 7-day attribution, I suppose there's also another question. I'm surprised it hasn't been asked yet, but is like with the iOS 14 update, what impact does that have on collecting data? So I don't know, Tom, what would you advise a client on that in terms of how can they collect data if they've got a longer consideration?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a tough one, especially with Facebook, because again, you're siloing that data and it's never going to be 100% perfect. I mean, I've worked with clients before where Facebook's recorded revenue has been higher than their total site revenue on that day. So whether you can 100% trust all the data you're getting out of Facebook, I would tend not to agree with. And there's also, yeah, as you talked about the iOS 14 side of things, there's going to be missing data in there because of that. But, you know, you don't stop marketing just because there's missing data. It's not ideal, but, you know, you can't measure 100% your catalogs that you send out, your magazines, your TV advertising. None of that is 100% trackable back to a conversion at the end. But people still do it and people measure the uplift, and that's going to have to be the way that Facebook goes in the future, and how I would recommend looking at it as well. You know, if you've got a long consideration and your window isn't long enough in Facebook anymore, you're going to have to take, it's a more generalist view and it's a more modeled view, but you're going to have to say, okay, so we've run some Facebook activity and uplift was X%, and that's going to have to be attributed back. So it's not 100%, it's not scientific, and it's not perfect, but a lot of the marketing that happens in the world right now isn't 100% scientific or perfect.
I suppose maybe that's part of the problem. We got a bit addicted to having this performance culture where we should be able to predict and perform everything, whereas actually not all of it is perfect. It's not an exact science. We can give a general direction of what we believe is going to happen, but actually it's not. It's still the whole sort of thing around brand and building up that requirement further up the funnel we've not been measuring it.
And I think it's a drug, isn't it? Like, it's there. You can just drop into GA, have a look, see what's going on. And sometimes you need to let things run their course. You know, give it a bit of time, look at things over a longer period of time for the more sort of general trends. Because while it's bumping around, you know, there'll be a trend in there, and it might be flat, it might be up. You know, you've got to look at it over time. And I think there's, you know, because the tools are there. There's sometimes the sort of temptation to pull all the levers, and so all you're doing is pulling the levers all the time, and you're moving the rudder left and right, but you're not going anywhere. So like, there's a bit about just leave things to settle in and sort of read it, you know, because sometimes it just takes people time.
I think there's another point there around your team and your marketers, and Tom touched on earlier that, like, there's going to be, you know, each marketing team, depending on the size of your team, you'll have different people look after different channels. I think probably the most important thing is that when you do change attribution models, or you're thinking about this, that you're applying a good level of kind of critical thought to what the output is, you know, and you're not taking it as read, that it's telling me to do this and I'm a robot, I just press the buttons. It's like that your teams are kind of empowered to challenge it, to understand it, and be really kind of a culture of challenging what is coming out and understanding it. Because oftentimes, you know, you drop a day's worth of data, you drop a tracker on one channel, and as I said, it's zero sum, it goes somewhere else. And often, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And other times you might be, you know, punishing yourself and not investing and losing out on opportunities. So I think that's another important part with this, is that you kind of have a team and a culture that understand that this is not like, you know, just do what it says. It's kind of a challenge sort of what it's doing. It is a guide at the end of the day. And each channel will have their own KPIs that sit behind their own performance channels that they should be working towards as well.
And I think hopefully it's going to help people make better informed decisions in the round, rather than just, but I think it is about, and just one quick last question before we do a sum up that's just coming on the Q&A from Jack. The question goes around, does a new model mean historical data needs to be disregarded? And I know, Cormac, you do a lot of digging around it in data. How would you go about dealing with historical data, and how would you re-attribute that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It kind of depends, right? If you change how your tracking is done, that's going to impact your historical data. I don't want to get too technical into it, but I wouldn't say disregards. If you're capable of re-attributing historical data, you know, if the data is consistent, you're just changing your attribution, then you just look at year on years under the new attribution. If you're actually changing fundamentally how the tracking is being done and being labeled, it might be more challenging. But, you know, I think if you feel strongly about it, there's a saying, you know, like kind of the best time to do it was a few years ago. The second best time is now. You know, just kind of take that slight hit, knowing that in 12 months' time, you know, you're going to be starting the anniversary, or in a few weeks' time, you'll start to see those trends. So potentially yes, but I wouldn't let that kind of detract from moving off a last click if that's the challenge.
And the point is, someone's going to say, "Oh, my performance has dropped off." I'm like, well, no, it hasn't. The way you report it or the way you're looking at it has changed. So, like, it's just accepting that the numbers are different, but it's giving you a different view. Like, it can't change the money through the till. It's just looking at where it came from and looking at it, you know, from a different way. And I think that people say, "Oh, my performance dropped." Like, no, it hasn't. It's just the way we're looking at it.
Okay, so we're just going to do a quick round robin, and then we'll close and sum up. But one thing somebody could do tomorrow, if they're thinking about moving towards an attribution model, what would that be? What do they need to do? So, Tom, you may repeat what you've already said before, but just summing up, practical tip for someone to do next week or tomorrow.
Yes, so my practical tip would be, I'm going to go for two things, cheating a little bit here.
Well, you're stealing them from other people now.
But my first tip is, first of all, have a conversation internally or with yourself, I don't know who's in your team, and just decide whether your current attribution model matches your business goals at the moment. That is step number one. And step number two is go have a look in your attribution platforms and just see what is happening, get an understanding of what's driving what, where are leads starting, where are sales starting, and what's in the middle of the journey and the end of the journey. Just give yourself a bit of data to sort of start making decisions.
Okay, Alex?
I don't know. It's difficult. It's all in there, to be honest with Tom. So I'm not sure how much more I'm going to add value to that. But I think allow yourself to go on a journey. So look at where you are now. Don't try and jump 3 jumps in one step, because I think you won't bring people with you.
Okay.
Accept that it's imperfect.
Accept it's all wrong. Just different versions of wrong.
Yeah.
Cool, man.
I think the guys have covered it mostly. I think there's one, what is a very kind of practical thing is just what I would do is take a day of your data or a week, whatever size your business is, and export every single transaction, and then look at the clicks against it. So from GA, you can pull a report that'll be able to look at your channel name or the referral page or whatever, and look at that and just become comfortable understanding what are the traffic sources are in the mix. And then, like Tom said earlier, you can look at click paths, and you get a really good feel for those sort of top volumes for click paths and top volume referral pages. And then question, am I looking at my channels in the right way before you even starting about how I'm going to attribute them? Like, am I confident that I've named all my channels, are and clear on what they are and what the traffic sources of my website are? So that's kind of where I would probably start.
Get hands-on with the data.
Yeah,
understanding how you're labeling it in order to even measure it in the first place. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Good. Well, first, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. We will answer all the other questions on the follow-up email. We do have, I'm just going to share my screen again. Here we go. So hopefully you can see that. Let me just go. We do.
It's always a letdown, isn't it, when everyone looks at these photos? Like, who are these handsome swans? And now they've seen us.
Better in the flesh. But everybody who's on the call now, if you want to email me, john@bosco.com, we can arrange for you guys to have a free trial of Bosco Connect. And again, what this can help you do is get all your data in one place, and then you can start having that attribution conversation if you want with your teams or internally. And then I suppose the interesting one, which sort of ties into this, the next session we've got, so we run one of these once a month, invite some interesting people just to have a bit of a fireside chat like we have today. And next month, and this has been prompted by a lot of our clients sort of saying, I'm suddenly getting asked so many more questions by the board about digital. And it's sort of been obviously prompted because the shops are being closed and now everybody suddenly thinks they're digital marketing experts. So I suppose what we want to challenge is, does the board really know enough about digital marketing? Are they asking the right questions? And how, as I suppose the people in the middle, how can we influence them or manage them to help us go on this journey? So it's 5 o'clock. I'd like to, on behalf of all the panel, thank you very much for attending and coming along. And hopefully you can join us again on the 23rd of June. And we'll send everybody who was here a copy of the video and answers to the questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.